The first sign that something was wrong was the shadow. It slid across the living room walls slowly, like a cloud that didn't belong to the sky. Except there were no clouds outside. Just darkness. And the faint glow of the street lamp flickering like it was reconsidering its life choices. He didn't notice at first. He was busy deciding whether the cold pizza in his hand was still technically food or had crossed into a new evolutionary category. He stared at it, turning the slice slightly. The cheese was stiff. The pepperoni had curled inward like it was trying to hide from responsibility. He shrugged. Good enough, he muttered, and took a bite. Outside, 3 massive alien ships silently locked into position over the apartment building. No explosions. No alarms. No dramatic music. Just quiet, controlled hovering, like they had all the time in the universe. Inside, he chewed slowly, eyes glued to his phone. A soft vibration passed through the floor. Subtle. Gentle. He paused mid-chew, glanced at the ceiling, then at the floor. He waited. Nothing else happened. He nodded once. Probably construction. He took another bite. A second later, there was a knock at his door. Not a normal knock. It was precise. Measured. 3 evenly spaced impacts. Firm, but not aggressive. Confident. He stared at the door for a full 10 seconds. Another knock followed. Same exact rhythm. He sighed. Putting the pizza slice down on the box, he stood up slowly, joints cracking like old furniture protesting movement. He walked to the door and opened it without checking. Standing in the hallway was the most beautiful being he had ever seen. She was tall, slightly taller than him, with smooth pale blue skin that almost glowed under the apartment lights. Her eyes were large, calm, and focused entirely on him with an intensity that felt surgical. Her dark hair flowed down her shoulders like liquid night, and she wore something that looked like a dress designed by someone who had only heard vague rumors about gravity. Behind her stood at least 15 others. Some wore armor that shimmered faintly, holding weapons that hummed quietly with restrained violence. Others wore long robes, their hands folded calmly. Several small floating drones hovered in the air, their lenses pointed directly at him, adjusting constantly. And behind all of them, 2 figures held what appeared to be tablets, already tapping and recording. He blinked once, then twice. He leaned his head slightly to the side. You guys lost. The tall blue woman stepped forward slightly. Her posture was perfect, controlled, royal. I am Princess Aelther of the 7th Stellar Dominion, she said, her voice calm and smooth. I have come to initiate the sacred breeding ritual. He stared at her, then at the people behind her, then back at her. He nodded slowly. Okay. He closed the door. He turned around, walked back to his couch, and sat down. He picked up his pizza and took another bite. 5 seconds later, there was another knock.
He didn't get up this time. Doors open, he said.
It slid open silently. They entered carefully, professionally, like a military operation mixed with a religious ceremony. The princess walked in first, her eyes never leaving him. The others followed, immediately spreading out across the apartment. One of the robed figures began chanting softly. Another activated a floating device that emitted a gentle scanning light across the room. A drone floated closer to his face. He leaned back slightly, squinting at it. You gonna help with rent? The drone tilted slightly, adjusting focus. Behind it, one of the scientists whispered urgently to another. Note the absence of fear. Incredible. He does not acknowledge technological superiority. Supreme confidence. He scratched his stomach absent-mindedly and leaned forward to grab his drink. Several of the observers froze. One of the judges whispered, Dominance display. Another nodded seriously. Primitive.
Direct.
Effective. The princess stepped closer, watching him carefully. You were selected, she said, because your genetic profile demonstrates extreme adaptability, resilience, and survival efficiency. He took a sip of his drink.
Cool.
He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. You guys want anything? The entire room went silent. One of the priests whispered, He offers resources. Another replied, Without negotiation. Without hesitation. Absolute genetic confidence. The princess tilted her head slightly. You offer sustenance, she said. He picked up the pizza box and held it out casually.
Yeah.
Pizza. The word meant nothing to them, but the gesture meant everything. Every alien in the room froze. The priests immediately stopped chanting. One of the judges stood up, so suddenly his chair fell over. The scientists stared in open shock. The princess looked at the box, then at him. You offer this freely? Yeah, he said. I mean, I don't want it to go to waste. One of the priests whispered urgently, he shares nourishment without securing dominance first. Another responded, this implies absolute certainty in his superiority. The princess reached forward slowly, carefully, like she was accepting a sacred artifact. She took the slice. Her fingers brushed his briefly. She froze. Her eyes widened slightly. Contact. Intentional.
Direct.
She lifted the slice carefully and took a small bite. The room held its breath. She chewed slowly. Her eyes widened further. This is extraordinary. The judges immediately began tapping their tablets rapidly. Record. Subject demonstrates unmatched provider instinct. Voluntary resource offering. Zero fear response. Maximum compatibility indicators. One of them looked up. Score perfect. Another nodded. Perfect. The princess lowered the pizza slice, staring at him with something new in her expression. Not just evaluation. Interest. Behind her, one of the drones emitted a soft tone, transmitting the results instantly across the stars. He leaned back into his couch, completely unaware he had just become the highest-rated breeding candidate in galactic history. He reached for another slice. You guys staying long? No one answered. They were too busy rewriting everything they thought they knew about humans. They didn't leave. That was the first thing he noticed the next morning. He woke up slowly, eyes half open, staring at the ceiling like he was waiting for reality to load properly. For a brief, hopeful moment, he assumed everything from last night had been a dream. Stress, bad pizza, maybe dehydration. Then he heard whispering.
Soft.
Careful. Observing whispering. He turned his head slightly without lifting it. 3 floating drones hovered near the ceiling, their lenses aimed directly at him. 2 robed figures stood near the wall, watching him with the intensity of scientists observing a rare predator in its natural habitat. He stared at them. They stared at him. He scratched his stomach. One of them immediately began tapping on a tablet. Subject has awakened, the robed figure whispered. Observe the relaxed posture. 0 defensive reaction. Remarkable. He blinked slowly, then sat up halfway. Morning, he said, his voice dry. The drones adjusted closer. One of the scientists stepped forward carefully. He was shorter than the others, his large eyes focused completely on the human. State your condition, the scientist said. He thought about it seriously. Hungry. The scientist froze. He turned urgently to the others. He prioritizes biological sustainability immediately upon waking. Efficient survival instinct. Optimal genetic efficiency. The human swung his legs off the couch and stood up. He stretched his arms above his head, his shirt lifting slightly. His spine cracked audibly. Several aliens flinched. Structural realignment, one whispered. Maintains physical functionality independently. Incredible. He walked past them toward the kitchen. None of them moved to stop him. They simply watched. He opened the fridge. Empty. He stared into it for a moment like he expected food to materialize out of shame. Damn. Behind him, one of the drones projected a soft blue light, scanning his body. He ignored it. He grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and drank it slowly. The princess stood in the doorway, watching him. She hadn't slept. Her posture was perfect, but her eyes showed focus. Curiosity. She had spent the entire night reviewing his behavioral patterns. His calm. His indifference. His lack of submission or aggression. He existed without needing to prove himself. It made no sense. In her world, everyone performed constantly. Competence was displayed, measured, ranked. Weakness was eliminated. But this human, he simply existed. And somehow, Everything adapted around him. He turned and noticed her standing there. "Oh," he said casually. "You're still here." Her attendants stiffened. The scientists watched closely. They expected arrogance, possession, dominance. Instead, he walked past her toward the couch again and sat down. He picked up his phone. She stepped forward slightly. "You show no concern," she said. He looked up briefly. "About
This.
She gestured to herself. The drones. The entourage. The impossible reality surrounding him. He shrugged. "I mean, you haven't attacked me." The scientists immediately began recording again. Note: subject evaluates threat level logically. No panic response. Extreme psychological stability. The princess moved closer. Most species demonstrate submission, fear, or attempts to impress superior beings. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds exhausting." Several aliens exchanged shocked looks. He leaned back into the couch, completely relaxed. "You guys seem nice enough." Nice enough. The phrase hit her harder than any declaration of submission ever could. He didn't see her as a ruler. He didn't see her as superior. He saw her as equal. Or maybe just another person. She had never experienced that before. She stepped closer, studying him carefully. "Do you not feel inferior?" she asked. He frowned slightly. "Why would I?" She hesitated. The question had never been asked back. He watched her, waiting. She realized something unsettling. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't trying to please her. He wasn't trying to dominate her. He was simply being himself.
It was terrifying.
And fascinating. He reached over and grabbed the last slice of pizza from the box. He paused, then held it out toward her again. "You want the last piece?" The entire room froze. One of the priests whispered urgently, "Repeat offering behavior. Consistent resource generosity. Unmatched provider instinct." She looked at the slice. Then at him. "You would give me your final nourishment?" He shrugged. "I can order more later." He didn't see it as sacrifice. He didn't see it as ritual. He saw it as normal. She accepted it slowly. Her fingers brushed his again. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. She felt warmth. Not physical. Something else. Something unfamiliar. She sat beside him carefully. Close enough to observe him fully. Not close enough to alarm him. He didn't move away. He didn't react. He simply continued sitting there, comfortable. Her attendants watched nervously. This was not proceeding according to protocol. Emotional proximity was inefficient. Attachment was dangerous. But she needed to understand. "Why are you calm?" she asked quietly.
He thought about it.
Then answered honestly. "Panicking doesn't really help." The simplicity of it struck her harder than any complex philosophy. No strategy. No manipulation. Just truth. He looked over at her. "You okay?" No one had ever asked her that before. Not as a princess. Not as royalty. Not as a breeding asset. But as a person. She realized she didn't know how to answer. For the first time in her existence, she wasn't being evaluated. She was just there. With him. And somehow, that felt more significant than the entire ritual. Behind them, one of the drones transmitted silently. Across the galaxy, billions watched. They expected dominance displays. They expected biological superiority rituals. Instead, they witnessed something they did not understand. Two beings, sitting side by side, sharing food, sharing space, sharing calm. And for reasons none of them could explain, the human was still scoring perfectly. The days that followed were unusual. The princess didn't leave. She didn't retreat to her chambers. She didn't consult her advisors, and she certainly didn't follow the endless checklists of a sacred breeding ritual. Instead, she spent hours observing him. Sometimes silently. Sometimes asking questions that had nothing to do with genetics or compatibility. She asked about his favorite foods, how he spent his weekends, why he liked certain music, why his plants were all dead despite his repeated attempts to keep them alive. He answered honestly, lazily, without trying to impress her. She found herself laughing more than she had in 1,000 cycles. The sound surprised her. It was warm and messy and utterly unplanned. Her attendance froze each time she chuckled, whispering urgently into tablets about unregulated emotional response and nonconforming behavior. She didn't care. She was fascinated. Humans were different. Their emotions weren't structured for efficiency or dominance. They just existed. And somehow, in this human, those emotions were magnetic. He, for his part, remained blissfully unaware of the effect he had. He made jokes without thinking about them, moved furniture accidentally while cleaning, and occasionally fell asleep on the couch mid-conversation. She watched him stretch, chew on snacks, tap on his phone. She even caught him singing badly to a song he claimed he loved but clearly didn't. She didn't correct him. She didn't criticize. She just watched. One afternoon, she tried to teach him how to brew a proper cup of alien tea, a complex ritual involving precise temperatures, vibrations, and subtle manipulation of quantum particles. He ignored all instructions and instead dumped hot water over the leaves, stirred it haphazardly, and took a sip. He grimaced. Then he smiled. "Not bad," he said. "Could be worse." She blinked. Her entire species trained for perfection, precision, and ritual. And here, in her presence, someone had achieved the unthinkable. He was beautiful in his imperfection. She began to test him in other ways. Subtle challenges, psychological exercises disguised as mundane activities. She asked him to complete puzzles, cook elaborate meals, organize his closet. Each time, he failed spectacularly. But he didn't panic. He adapted. He shrugged. He improvised. The scientists observing silently were baffled. Every failed attempt should have caused stress, panic, or emotional collapse. Instead, the human adjusted effortlessly. They recorded notes furiously. Adaptation exceeds previous maximums. Emotional resilience, unprecedented. Cultural and biological implications, catastrophic for prior models. The princess stopped pretending that this was a ritual in her mind. She couldn't. Her fascination was no longer scientific, it was personal. She found herself leaning closer to him during conversations, mimicking his casual movements, even occasionally sitting in a way that mirrored him, subconsciously, because she wanted to understand the ease of being human. He noticed it, of course.
But he didn't comment.
He didn't analyze. He just smiled when she laughed at his ridiculous cooking attempts or shook her head at his careless approach to chores. He didn't see her as royalty. He didn't see her as a scientific subject. He saw her as a companion. And slowly, she realized that the ritual she had come to perform, the sacred breeding procedure, was no longer relevant. It felt meaningless compared to the warmth, the humor, and the unpredictability he brought into her life. The idea of forcing herself into a rigid protocol while sitting beside him, watching him lazily sip coffee and tap at his phone, now seemed absurd. Her attendants noticed. They whispered about protocol breaches, emotional contamination, and the risk of planetary scandal. She ignored them. She could feel something stirring inside her that had nothing to do with genes or genetics. Something entirely alien to her culture. Desire. Connection. Attraction. One evening, they sat together on the couch. He was watching a ridiculous comedy movie, laughing at a scene that didn't make any sense. She tilted her head, watching the way his eyes crinkled, the way his lips curved in amusement. She realized she had never wanted anything more in her life than to be allowed to sit beside him, to witness these small, inconsequential moments of joy. "You know," he said casually, glancing at her, "you don't have to watch this if you don't like it." She shook her head. I like it," she admitted. "I like being here." The words felt heavy and unfamiliar. Her species didn't talk about preference or enjoyment. They acted according to duty, hierarchy, and ritual. And yet, she wanted this. She wanted him. Not as a ritual object. Not as a test subject. But as someone who made her laugh. Someone who made her forget everything she had been trained to prioritize. He smiled at her like she was just another human companion sharing an ordinary day. And that, more than anything else, made her heart, or whatever the alien equivalent of a heart was, skip. Outside, the drones recorded, the scientists documented, and the royal entourage whispered anxiously. Across the galaxy, the highest council monitored every interaction. They expected dominance displays, mating rituals, ceremonial perfection. Instead, they were witnessing something unprecedented, two beings connecting on a level that defied all known protocols. She leaned back, resting her head lightly on his shoulder for the first time. He didn't flinch. He didn't even comment. He just shifted slightly to accommodate her. The gesture was simple, mundane, yet profoundly intimate. The princess realized, with a jolt, that she didn't want to leave. She didn't want the ritual to end. She didn't want anyone else to interfere. All she wanted was this messy, imperfect, unpredictable human beside her, laughing, eating, living, and existing exactly as he was.
It was terrifying.
It was exhilarating. It was nothing like anything she had ever experienced. And she knew, deep in the core of her alien being, that this connection, this utterly human, utterly irrational, and yet perfect bond, was the most significant discovery she had ever made. No tests, no scores, no protocols, just him and her, sharing space, sharing time, sharing laughter, sharing moments that didn't need to be measured to matter. She smiled at him, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the weight of duty. She didn't feel the burden of expectation. She felt alive. And he, as usual, took a bite of pizza, shrugged, and said, "See? This is why mornings are underrated." She laughed. Loud, unrestrained, and completely human. And something deep inside her shifted forever. The command came suddenly, with the weight of 1,000 stars pressing down on her. Her communicator buzzed sharply, vibrating against her wrist, and the voice of the High Council was crisp, unwavering, and impossibly authoritarian. They reminded her of duty, tradition, and the sacred protocol she had been trained to uphold since birth. The sacred breeding ritual was not optional. The ritual had to be completed. She was a princess, an emissary of her people, and the galaxy was watching. There was no room for hesitation, no room for personal preference. She looked over at him. He was sprawled lazily on the couch, a half-eaten slice of pizza in his hand, oblivious to the looming edict from across the stars. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes relaxed. He didn't carry the burden of empires or expectations. He just existed in a way that was both baffling and intoxicating. He smiled at her casually, completely unaware of the universe-altering consequences resting on her shoulders. The council's voice filled the room again, demanding immediate compliance. They reminded her of the billions watching, of the historical significance of her mission, and of the protocols that had been established over millennia. The word should have intimidated her, should have brought her back under the rigid discipline of her upbringing. But instead, they felt distant, abstract. The pull of her duty competed with something much stronger, something she had never expected: desire, affection, and a connection that was purely human. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down, and then looked at him again. He tilted his head, noticing her hesitation. "You okay?" he asked simply. No judgment. No command. Just curiosity. That simple question, the casual concern of someone who didn't care about protocol or perfection, shook her more than any council order ever could. In that moment, she realized that the ritual, sacred, historic, meticulously orchestrated, meant nothing if it required sacrificing this connection. Her mission had been to evaluate, to perform, to maintain perfection. Instead, she had discovered something entirely new: emotional resonance, laughter, mutual respect, unpredictability. The human's laziness, honesty, and imperfection had revealed strengths her people had long forgotten. Emotional intelligence, joy, and the ability to live without constant calculation were revolutionary. She straightened, finally making her choice. She would not complete the ritual. She would not conform to expectation. She would not be reduced to a protocol or a spectacle. The council would call it insubordination, perhaps even betrayal, but she no longer cared. She looked at him and smiled, this time fully aware of the gravity of her decision, but also fully certain it was the right one. He blinked, surprised but not alarmed. "Wait, you're staying?" he asked. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that made the chaos around them seem irrelevant. "Yes," she said. "I choose this thus. Not because of duty, not because of genes, but because of this." She gestured between them, indicating the laughter, the meals, the quiet moments of shared space and ordinary life. He nodded slowly, a grin spreading across his face.
Cool.
I mean, it's kind of a relief. Space politics are complicated, I'm sure. She laughed softly. It wasn't the mechanical, controlled laugh of a princess trained to perfection. It was real, messy, human. She reached out, brushing his hand lightly. He didn't flinch. He didn't overreact. He just adjusted slightly, letting her rest closer. Behind them, the attendants and scientists were in full panic mode. Tablets were being tapped furiously. Alarms, subtle and silent, blinked across the room. The council was undoubtedly furious. Orders for immediate retrieval were being drafted. Protocols for disciplinary action were being outlined. And yet, she ignored all of it. The human's casual defiance of pressure, his ability to remain relaxed under absurd circumstances, had taught her something fundamental. Emotional strength, she realized, was more powerful than obedience, strategy, or genetic superiority. The drones still hovered, recording. The cameras still transmitted. Across the galaxy, billions watched, expecting ritual, dominance, perfection. Instead, they witnessed laughter, shared pizza, and a princess defying the greatest empire in her history to sit beside a human who didn't even try to impress her. She picked up the pizza box again, holding it out this time with a playful smile. "Want the last slice?" she asked, mimicking the gesture he had made so casually before. He grinned. "Sure," he said, reaching for it. Their fingers brushed, a small spark of connection traveling between them. The gesture was simple, mundane, but it symbolized so much more: equality, choice, and shared humanity. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The High Council's threats, the sacred rituals, the observers' whispers, all faded into irrelevance. The galaxy could wait. Politics, protocols, and centuries of tradition could wait. All that mattered was this moment, shared between two beings who had found something neither expected, a connection that transcended duty, expectations, and even species. The princess leaned back, resting her head on his shoulder. He shifted slightly, accommodating her effortlessly. She felt warmth, not from physical closeness alone, but from trust, humor, and the strange simplicity of shared life. He handed her a napkin casually, and she laughed at his inefficiency in folding it properly. He shrugged. "Better than nothing," he said. And in that laughter, that shared imperfection, the universe seemed to expand. She realized that the greatest discovery wasn't about genetics or rituals or dominance. It was about love, choice, and the messy, chaotic, beautiful nature of being alive. Outside, the stars continued to shine. The ships that had once signaled awe and terror hovered silently. And inside the small, cluttered apartment, two beings, one human, one alien princess, sat side by side, sharing food, laughter, and a bond that would change not only their lives but the way their species viewed each other forever. She smiled, truly smiled, and said softly, "I'm glad I stayed." He took a bite of pizza and nodded, perfectly content. "Me too." And for the first time in recorded history, the galaxy understood. Humans might not be the strongest, the fastest, or the most precise, but they were extraordinary in ways no protocol could ever measure. And she, the alien princess, had chosen that extraordinary over everything else.